Welcome. Open the hearing.
Good morning, Commissioners. There are a couple of appearances to be announced.
Oh, yes.
Good morning, Commissioners. I wish to announce my appearance. My name is Hackett, H-A-C-K-E-T-T. I appear in the interests of Mr Vida Webb, pursuant to leave granted on 30 October 2019. May it please the Commission.
Thank you, Mr Hackett.
Commissioners, I have, outside the hearing room, been talking to Ms Fiona McKenzie, who I understand appears for a witness that will be called later this morning, Ms Hudek. So I'll just, out of a matter of courtesy, indicate that to the Commissioners. She may be out of the hearing room at the moment, perhaps talking to her client. I suspect she'll announce an appearance in due course.
Could it be the person who's just about to walk down?
No.
No. All right, thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr Rosen. Ms Bergen?
May it please the Commission, I call Meredy May Eastman.
Yes. I solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm
I solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
will be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Do feel free to sit down.
Thank you.
Make yourself comfortable, Miss Eastman.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you please state your full name for the Commission?
Meredy May Eastman?
And have you prepared a statement?
Yes, I have.
Is there a copy of your statement there in front of you?
Yes, there is.
And do you have any amendments to that statement?
Yes, I do. Paragraph 72. When Dr. Monk's, the last sentence, when Dr. Monks had suggested our mother see a doctor outside of Bupa for a foot injury, for a foot infection, that happened 2 months. Oh, that happened 1 year earlier, not 2 months.
So that last sentence, first word should read, having seen Dr. Lavers about her foot a year earlier?
Exactly.
Save for that amendment, are there any further amendments?
No.
Is it true and correct on the basis of your knowledge, information and belief?
Yes.
I tender the statement of Meredy May Eastman, dated the 31st of October 2019.
Yes, thank you. That statement will be Exhibit 13-24.
Ms Eastman, you mentioned to me earlier that you'd like me to call you Meredy, is that right?
Yes, please.
You live in Sydney?
Yes.
And your mum lives at Bupa South Hobart?
Yes.
Your mum's name is Berenice?
Yes.
She's lived there since she and your dad first moved there in January 2016?
That's right.
They had 3 periods in respite care in 2014 and 2015.
Yes.
Before moving into Bupa South Hobart as residents.
Mm-hmm.
Your dad passed away on the 8th of January 2018.
Yes.
And his name was Walter.
Yes.
Meredy, where did your parents meet?
They met in Sydney in the mid-50s. They were both from very different parts of Sydney. He was a working class boy and she was quite posh. And they met through their appreciation of music at the Botanical Gardens, where he was working for the ABC selling programs, and they met and had a conversation, and that was the beginning.
That was the beginning. And how many children did they have, Meredy?
3.
How many grandchildren did they have?
They've got 2.
And could you tell us what were their hobbies or interests?
Oh, they were devoted to the arts, both of them, and that's what really, kept them together. They loved theatre, music, literature. My mother was a librarian, a teacher librarian as well as a writer. And Dad was in broadcasting with the ABC and then administration with the ABC. And then he became the Mercury newspaper theatre critic here for many years. He got an Order of Australia back in 2010, I think, or around about then. And they were both pretty well known in the community because they were curious, generous, outgoing people that got involved in a lot of public arts things, and they wanted to encourage children especially to get involved.
And so you were born in New South Wales?
I was born in Canberra.
In Canberra. And at what point did your parents move to Tasmania?
I think it was 1974 or 3. We went to friends' school and settled in Sandy Bay and, yeah.
And your mum's been living in Tasmania ever since?
Yes.
When did your parents first move into the retirement village in Vaucluse Gardens?
That was 2008 when we knew that Mum could no longer take care of Dad, as they were both in their late 80s and things were getting a bit difficult. So, yeah.
You mentioned that things were getting a bit difficult. What prompted the move into a retirement village?
My father was becoming more and more ill with diabetes, the beginnings of dementia. He'd had a series of heart attacks and mini strokes. They had an extremely happy marriage. Mum was devoted to looking after him to the point where we had to peel her off him kind of thing and, go off at her for not letting others help. So she was really suffering. And she herself has acute osteoporosis and acute scoliosis. She has her head permanently bowed on her chest. She's tiny, she's frail. And she was doing things like, putting wheelie bins out in the street and looking after Dad. So we just knew that we had to get them into a retirement village.
And how did your parents and the family select Vaucluse Gardens?
They had a few friends who were at Vaucluse Gardens and loved it. So they were really going to a community of friends that they loved and knew and who were interested in the same things. And the care in those days was pretty good. These weren't high care people, obviously, but they had some sort of supervision. They could press a green button and a man would appear at the door saying, "What do you need?"
And was it a consideration that there was a residential facility next door to this retirement village?
Yes, that was, in those days, it was part of Vaucluse Gardens. It was the next stage of care. And a lot of people went from Vaucluse Gardens to, I don't know what it was called before, it was called Bupa, but they went over there and it was, the connection was great because it meant that, people would go and visit each other.
Your dad first moved from Vaucluse Gardens Retirement Village to Bupa South Hobart in 2014, initially for respite.
That's right.
And how were those, 3 respite experiences for your dad?
He liked it. He liked it very much because it was relaxing and people looked after him, but he missed Mum. So when she was there as well, he loved it. And when she was there as well, she especially loved it. She thought it was like staying at the Hilton.
At the Hilton in Bupa South Hobart in 2014?
Yes.
And why was that?
She was there because Dad had fallen onto her in the driveway, and they both needed care. They both needed to recover. She couldn't keep making meals and things, so we decided the best thing was to put them both in Bupa and have some respite. So yeah, they loved it.
Why did you describe it as the Hilton?
Mum couldn't believe it because it was the first time in decades that she was putting her feet up and someone else was looking after Dad. It was just what she needed.
She was having a well-earned rest.
Yes.
So then by the end of 2015, you and your siblings decided to move both of your parents into Bupa South Hobart for residential care?
Yes.
And they moved into the manor in January 2016? Yes. Mm-hmm. What sort of room were they in?
They were in a lovely room. It was up on the 4th floor and it had a balcony that looked down on the rivulet. My father used to love watching the ducks and things out there. The sun would come streaming in. It was called a double room. We were surprised when we'd seen it when we first saw it because we thought it was no bigger than some of the singles that we'd seen, but we were happy with the position of it, and they were happy, especially, or we sort of engineered it so that they actually didn't see it properly. We showed them photos, but they didn't walk into it until my brother and I had spent 2 weeks moving all their paintings and things and bookcases, and so the whole place looked like home when they walked through the front door.
And it was a double room in the sense that both your mum and dad could sleep in the same room?
Yes. It was one room really with a bit of a wall partition that went halfway along a wall that would divide the bedroom from the lounge room, but it didn't. It was really one room with a bit of a partition.
You mentioned that you and your brother furnished the room with lots of their possessions. What were your impressions of the facility as a whole at that time?
Our impressions were pretty good because, you know, you've got these beautiful, immaculate gardens. Everything is clean. Everything looks comfortable and inviting. So physically, it's very appealing. The staff were very friendly. As soon as we moved them in, my parents are very friendly, so there was lots of, you know, friendly conversations and welcomes going on.
You mentioned in your statement that there were some initial concerns about 5 months in, being around May 2016. What were those initial concerns?
Mum was ringing us up with her complaints because she didn't want to complain directly to any of the carers because she loved them all so much. She knew all their names, where they were from, their families, everything. So she would ring us and say, you know, we didn't get breakfast this morning, or breakfast was late, or there's no sanitary pull-ups in the bathroom, which was really important, or the rubbish in the kitchen hasn't been taken out for days, and she couldn't get to see. No, that was actually later. I'll save that till later.
In your statement, you say that Mum knew it was a staff to resident ratio problem.
Yes.
And why do you make that observation?
Well, because when she needed staff to help with Dad, if no one came when she pressed the emergency button, she would go out on the floor and look for staff, and she would not be able to see any staff. And when we went down to Hobart, because we went down every 2 or 3 months, we experienced this as well, because there was just no one around. They weren't, you know, downstairs having a coffee. They were all working, but there just weren't enough of them. They were on different floors.
So to take an example, Meredy, how long did your mum tell you she had to wait if she pressed the buzzer for assistance, for example?
There were different stories. She'd press the buzzer usually for an emergency with Dad, and she'd had to wait 20 minutes, 40 minutes, and once no one came. She went looking for help.
So it was the case that one time no one came?
Yeah. I don't even know if that was just one case.
That's one case that you're aware of?
Yeah.
What assistance did your mum provide to others in the facility?
Well, Mum and Dad's room was just next to the common room, where a group of about 6 ladies used to enjoy sitting after any meal and chatting, which was lovely, and you could hear them through the wall. And then they would all go to their rooms, especially after dinner, but one would be left behind because she was blind. And she would sit there and have to wait until a carer or someone came and took her to her room. And she'd sit there quietly for some time, and then inevitably she'd start to call, hello, hello, hello. And then Mum would go and, you know, try and find help. If we were there, we would try and go and find help. But Mum was ringing us up saying that on several occasions she'd had to take this lady to the toilet because she was calling out for help going to the toilet, and Mum had pressed the buzzer and no one had come. So my 90-year-old mother was taking a 90-year-old blind woman to the toilet, which was a dangerous situation.
And in calling out hello, hello, was the blind woman left in the common room and unable to navigate her way back to her room?
Yes.
And as she was calling out, was she to, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, she was calling out to seek assistance with navigating the facility?
That's right. She couldn't navigate on her own at all.
And your mum could hear her because the common room was near to the double room that she shared with your dad?
Yes, and Mum always kept the door open, so you could just hear through the wall, but if you had the door open, you could hear everything.
What gap, just to spell it out a little bit more, what gap did your mum seem to be, what gap did you observe your mum was filling here?
She was caring for her husband and a blind resident, which was ridiculous. The carers were everywhere doing as much as they could, but Mum was left in this situation on a daily basis or a weekly basis. Daily with Dad, weekly with this lady, I'd say, or every fortnight maybe.
And when you say that your mum was caring for your dad and the blind resident, this is in the sense that she was carrying out activities that you expected care staff would carry out?
Yes, because some of the things that Mum was doing herself for Dad were things like dressing him, helping him with his incontinence problems. She was taking his soiled clothes downstairs to wash in the washing machine, bringing them back up. So she was permanently moving around, dressing him, picking up crumbs off the floor, making their bed, washing his clothes. Whenever a carer was available, they did these things. But this was the problem, that they just weren't available on a daily basis. And so my mother was doing this on a daily basis.
And how old was your mum at this time?
She was 89, 90.
Did you or your mum or your siblings bring this situation with your mum filling gaps left by care staff absence to the attention of Bupa South Hobart or
Yes.
to management or staff?
We brought it up with whoever walked into the room when we were there, in a friendly way, because we often shared our concerns with the carers that were also finding it frustrating. We wrote emails to Raylene Fresel when she was General Manager, and then to David Neal when he took over. And then later on we started writing emails to the two care managers at the manor.
Yes, and we'll just refer to those care managers as the clinical care managers today.
Clinical care managers.
What response were you given?
We were always told that we were wrong about the staff to resident ratio, that there was adequate staff, even though there clearly wasn't. That was a repeated sentence in their emails. They also were very well-intentioned, I'm sure, in saying, you know, yes, we will get onto this and thank you, and promising us that improvements would be made, including a family conference at one point in May, I think, 2016, when things were really obviously going off the rails and we needed to have some kind of get-together.
So the response was well-intentioned and saying, yes, we'll get on to this. And
Yes.
what observations did you make about things that did or did not change?
One observation I made was that Mum was quite often referred to as a bit stubborn, not letting us. She's being difficult, you know, in a friendly way, but they were passing the blame on to Mum, that she was not open to receiving help and support. And I think that there is some truth in that, but I think this is one of those gaps that has to be filled in aged care, where you have to have that conversation very clearly with an independent ageing person, that they are there because they can give up all those things and they will be cared for now. But on the other hand, my mother's not seeing that care, so who can blame her for not, you know, still making the bed and still picking up the crumbs and still changing Dad?
So that sounds like an explanation as to why things didn't change.
Yeah.
But what observations did you make about the situation with your mum having to assist your dad with dressing and with assisting the blind resident with responses to the buzzer, for example? Did you observe any changes in the care given by the staff?
No, not really. I think you can see that in all our emails, our repeated emails saying this still isn't happening, and there weren't any cleaning staff on the weekend, or it just kept, the emails back were very reassuring, but the actual, you know, action on the floor wasn't that different. There was still a problem.
Now, by about May 2016, you started to bring problems to the attention of Mr. Neal at the facility,
Yeah,
and this also related to lack of staff on the floor.
yes.
And this is around paragraph 22 and 23 and 28 of your statement. How did you find, what changes resulted, or what response were you given at this time?
Well, the same thing really. We're complaining about there being not enough staff.
And was that, in your opinion, the cause of the problems that your mum and your dad were experiencing?
Yes, that was the
To deteriorate in about July 2017 and again in November 2017. How was this for your mum?
This was really upsetting for Mum because on the one hand she's watching her husband deteriorate, so there's the distress of that. On the other hand, she is in despair because she sees he's not getting the help that he needs. She's also in despair because she's not getting the support that she needs to help him, and she's also feeling anxious about her own future. It's accumulative. It adds to a huge feeling of insecurity in an aged resident when they see someone they love dearly not getting the support and care that they need.
Do you want to have a glass of water, Meredith?
Yeah. Thanks.
There are some tissues there as well.
Yeah, I'll be fine.
Okay. Meredith, at about this time you mentioned that your mum was approached about moving rooms. Is that right?
No, what happened was my mum asked about moving rooms herself because it was getting to the point that Dad was so dangerously unstable on his feet and in every way actually with his health problems, with his heart failure and his dementia, that she said, I think it was July 2017 and then again in November 2017, she said, I'm just not coping, maybe he should be in a separate room and I could visit him every day, but then people would stop seeing us as a unit and they would realise that I need care and that he needs care, and then things will get better. And we thought that was a great idea, so we actually brought it up with Bupa and asked about, you know, the possibilities of rooms and deposits and all the money that would entail. But we were curious, but then Mum said, no, I don't want to do it because I couldn't bear to do it to him. So she was too emotionally attached to Dad to do it, and then she changed her mind again in November because, again, she was really suffering.
So there was a bit of tension for your mum between her care needs and her attachment and love for your dad?
Definitely.
What were your feelings about this situation?
I thought that she nailed it when she said that they see us as a unit. I think that there's a danger in that double room because if you don't have enough staff and people are rushing, well not rushing, but you know, in a hurry from one thing to another past the doorway and they can see two elderly people sitting together, it looks like they're okay. But if they were sitting on their own, one might come in and say, are you okay? And find out, no, they're not. So that was a problem.
How was your mum's own health at this time?
She was not great. She had a series of urinary tract infections, and we suspect that's because of the lack of hygiene care, because of the lack of sanitary pull-ups available all the time. For some reason there was, I gather, some cost-cutting method of supplying only 3 sanitary pull-ups a day. Sometimes there were 2, sometimes there was, you know, none. We would go looking for them. So she had a series of UTIs. She had her pain from her scoliosis and osteoporosis, her neck, which, you know, if you can imagine just walking around the entire time with your head resting on your chest and you're picking up crumbs off the floor, dressing your husband and taking him in and out of rooms. She never complained, but she was in pain. We knew because she had the osteopanadol, whatever it was called, with her all the time. She was extremely stoic and more worried about him, so she didn't often speak up about her own pain, but it was clear that she was in pain.
Your dad passed away in January 2018.
Yeah.
And how did your mum manage his death?
She was devastated, of course. We all knew it was coming. It was just a time of great sadness.
Yes.
She was very stoic. We were all there. We'd all been there for Christmas, so we were all there through mid-December till the end of January in the end, so that we could help her. But then we all had to go back and get on with our own lives. But she was coping.
Yes, so through December and January, you and your two siblings were with your mum, supporting her
Yeah.
through this difficult time. And your mum at this stage was still in the double room that she had shared with your dad.
Yeah.
And how did she feel about her... I withdraw that. What were your mum's feelings about wanting to stay in the room?
Well, we had been told by the manager, David Neal, when we were talking about moving them into separate rooms, that once Dad moved out of their room, that Mum would have to go too, because it was a double room and it could only be there used for 2 people. So now that Dad died, we were terrified that they were going to tell Mum to go out of the room, to leave the room and put her in another room.
And you were terrified because your mum wanted to stay there with the
It was
memories
her
of your
home.
dad?
It was her home, and 2 of the clinical care managers had said to her, "This is your home, you won't have to move out of this room." And my sister was present when both of those conversations happened. So we started to feel, and also because the room's the same size, as I said, as some of the singles, we started to feel secure about her. Surely, you know, someone who's been here for 2 years, who everyone loves, who's such a lovely person, who's going through this awful situation, who's not well, surely they won't throw her out, or at least not in a hurry, you know. And I don't want to say throw her out, no one talked about it like that, but in hindsight, that's what it felt like. She was, you asked how she felt. She was terribly distressed about it, to the point where we actually lied to her. We told her a lot of lies around this time because she was really going through a difficult time. We told her, it's all right, you can stay. So, and we were madly, you know, doing things behind the scenes to try and get her to
So when you
stay.
say you lied, do you mean that you said things to reassure her?
Yes.
Which might be sort of true only in the short term, but...
That's right. Well,
Not
we
the
had looked at
long-term plan?
we had looked at the contract by now, and we could see that 2 people had to be in this room, and that if one died, the other one had to go to a single room.
Mm-hmm.
It did not say in the contract anything about time frame, and we repeatedly asked David Neal to tell us give us some sort of time frame.
Okay, and what did Mr Neal say about whether or not your mum had to move in the short or medium or long term out of the double room that she'd been sharing with your dad for years now?
Well, he was away on holidays when Dad died, but he was coming back towards the end of January. Yes. So it wasn't until David was returned on, I think it was the 25th of January, somewhere around there, that he started to say very firmly in a series of emails, your mother has to go.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, now, next week.
And
And
at
Dad
this-
had died 3 weeks earlier.
And your dad's funeral had been on the 22nd of January?
I think it was the 21st, yeah.
21st of January. How long, what would you have, so your mum was put under, or the family was put under some pressure for your mum to move?
We were
promptly?
put under incredible pressure. We were writing series of emails, almost begging him to be kinder and compassionate to Mum, and not make her move 3 weeks or even 4 weeks after she lost Dad. I should also say that at this point, Mum, she'd had a failed root canal procedure just before Dad died, and so now that she was on painkillers for the tooth,
What would you have preferred for your mum?
I would have preferred, I'll just finish what I was saying. She was on painkillers and her usual medication and antibiotics, and she just lost Dad. And she had acute osteoporosis and scoliosis. And she and all of us would have preferred that she could stay in her room, which wasn't her room, it was her home, for 1 or 2 months longer than this. We were prepared to all come back to Hobart and help facilitate this move, but we thought to do it to her when none of us were there to help, when we had been asking for responses while we were still there and getting none, to make her go through this on her own with so little notice at such a time in her life was cruel.
And what was your understanding of the reasons the facility required your mum to move promptly?
David Neal's emails over and over again, never referred to our mother and her situation. They referred to 119 beds, revenue, income, loss. It was like we were on the same board as him and not a family of a resident. Sorry. So we found his emails were very callous and businesslike, and our situation couldn't have been more personal and distressing, requiring compassion.
Merida, you mentioned later in your statement at 71 that your family and you wasn't offered a condolence book for your dad in what you describe as the unlike every other resident who has passed away at Bupa South Hobart.
Yeah.
Why was that?
We didn't know. We all noticed it because we'd been visiting Bupa for years and we'd seen people pass away and get this condolence book always as you came into the building so that you couldn't miss it. And when our father died, he didn't get one. We noticed it, we felt hurt, we didn't say anything. I think we genuinely didn't say anything because we were so worried about Mum and what she was going through. We actually were robbed of the whole grieving for Dad process because of this room business. There wasn't the time to sort of argue about that or petition for that as well. We just noted it and thought that was really hurtful because it seemed deliberate. By now we knew that we were a real thorn in the side of management, and their emails were letting us know that we were not their favourite family. So we kind of wondered if it was a personal statement.
Merida, you mentioned at paragraph 104 that you consider there have been improvements at Bupa South Hobart since the facility was sanctioned in October 2018. How do you consider things have improved?
Okay, I think that they've improved because of losing accreditation and being in the news and knowing they've got to quickly lift their game, well not lift their game but change their game. I think that Mandy Woodruff, the manager that came on board, was much more approachable and proactive and got a lot of things going. She certainly opened up communication between residents, families and management in a way that I'd never witnessed before. I thought she was wonderful in that regard. And so we could see changes on the floor in terms of there being so many less residents. There was more relaxed staff with more time.
Have you noticed any improvements in your mum's care needs being met?
Yes, I think that there's a little bit more daily routine, which we had petitioned for months, about hearing aids and bathing time, bathing at all. I think that is now happening on a very regular basis. Someone knocks on her door and offers her a cup of tea in the afternoon, which they didn't used to. They did at the manor, but not at the court.
Merida, I'll just pause you there. You say that the staff to resident ratio appears to be higher than it was before. Why is that, do you think?
Well, my feeling is that it's because there's so fewer residents, because they weren't allowed to take on new residents in this period. That's my honest answer to that.
Yes. You mentioned just a moment ago that one of the things that has improved is communication. And I just want to ask you about complaints management and what would assist, in your view, moving forward. Would it assist if there was more transparency about complaints that have been made, when they were made, when they were responded to, and what's changed, for example?
Definitely. There's no transparency at the moment. You write these emails to a clinical care manager or to the manager, and you get a reply, and you don't know who they've spoken to or when or what the outcome was. You just know that nothing much has changed. I think that it would be great if there was some kind of group of representatives from family, residents, carers. I was going to say nurses, but there's so few nurses they wouldn't have time to get together and discuss the problems and then take their findings back to management. I don't see why something like that can't happen on a regular basis.
Yes. To what would it be of assistance if there was a complaints register?
It would depend if it was a cardboard box by the
A register where
That would
you
not be
could,
good.
a transparent register that
Yeah.
you could inspect,
Yes.
that anyone could inspect.
I think
And
that's a great idea. Yes.
and better process around complaints management.
Yes. At the moment, I don't even know what it is, that process.
Okay. Now, Meredy, just finally, I wanted to ask you why it was important for you to give evidence today to the Royal Commission.
It's important because of what we saw our parents go through, which was unnecessarily and remains to a certain extent, because Mum's still there, unnecessarily heartbreaking. I shouldn't be feeding other residents at the table when I go to visit Mum. She shouldn't be helping residents go to the bathroom. I just think it's really important to speak on behalf of these people and to draw our attention to the carers as well, and they're also suffering. You know, that you don't go and work in aged care for money, clearly. You do it because you want to be of service to elderly people. So I think everyone in these buildings is suffering as a result of bad governance, and I hope that this Royal Commission shines a light on that and changes it.
Thank you, Meredy. Commissioners, that concludes my examination of this witness.
Yes, thank you. Ms Eastman, thank you for giving evidence and for your part in shining the light on these circumstances. It's a distressing story that you have told us of a lack of care and compassion of two elderly people at a time when they needed care and compassion. It's distressing to hear that that lack has been motivated, even in part, for a need to earn profit or increase revenue. We're very grateful that you've come out. I'm sure there are lots of other people who are grateful that they've heard your story on their behalf. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I must formally excuse you from further attendance.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Rosen.
Thanks. See you. Commissioners, I call Elizabeth Westholes and Stephanie Heckenberger. Commissioners, while the witnesses are making their way to the witness box, can I just raise one housekeeping matter? I think you should have in front of you an A3 table, which was what I'd had on the screen yesterday during the opening. I've discussed this with my learned friends. They're content for that to be before you, really by way of an aid memoir. It's a document that's been prepared by the staff in the Commission. I'm happy to tender it if it would be helpful from an identification point of view. I don't know if that's really necessary. I hand it up subject to this. Ms Needham's instructors have prepared, that is Bupa's legal team have prepared a similar document, albeit one that's more comprehensive in the sense that it extends to the period after sanctions, whereas this one is only concerned with audits before sanctions. I'm quite content for both of them to be before the Commission. We don't take any issue with the accuracy of theirs. They don't take any issue with the accuracy of ours. They depict different time frames essentially and use different colour. They've got more colours than us. We concede that. So I think copies are available.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Commissioners. The spreadsheet which we have prepared, as Mother and Friend says, provides a longer time frame, and it also, rather than merely having compliance or not assessed or not assessed yet commented on in the same colour, we've split that up, and it's, we think, with respect to Mother and Friend, more helpful. But if I could hand that up.
Well, presumably more informative.
Yes, my friend, Mr. Rosen, suggests I read the code onto the transcript. The green is compliant or met. Oh, the code, I'm sorry. BPA 001 274 0001.
All right, thank you.
Commissioners, might I just announce my appearance to, my name is England. I'm here instructed by Nita Ellison for Ms. Heckenberger, pursuant to leave that was granted on the 30th of October 2019.
Yes, thank you, Ms. England.
For completeness, Commissioners, I should read the code of our table onto the transcript too. It's RCD.9999.0263.001. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Commissioners. In no particular order of importance, I assure you. Ms Westholes, can I ask you to please state your full name for the transcript?
I'm Elizabeth Ann Wessels.
And Ms Westholes, have you provided the Royal Commission with a witness statement dated the 9th of October 2019 that has the code WIT.0444.0001.0001?
Yes, I have.
And I think you've got a hard copy of that in front of you.
Yes.
And there should also be the first page of that on the screen. Are there any changes that you wish to make to your statement?
Yes, I would like to make a change to paragraph 4.
Yes.
Just to state that currently I'm now working as a regional support manager for Region 12 for Bupa.
Okay. So would you have us add the following, or would you like to add the following words to the end of paragraph 4? On 30 October 2019, I returned to being a regional support manager for Region 12, covering Portland, Ballarat, Barrabool, Bellarine, Lake, is that right?
Lakes.
Lakes and Sunshine.
That's correct.
With that change being made by those words being added to the end of paragraph 4, are the contents of your statement true and correct?
Yes, they are.
I'll tender the statement of Ms Westholes, Commissioners.
Yes, the statement of Ms Westpholes will be Exhibit 13-25.
Ms Heckenberger, could you please state your full name for the transcript?
Yes, my name is Stephanie Gay Heckenberger.
And Ms Heckenberger, you have made 2 witness statements for the Royal Commission.
That's correct.
The first of those is dated the 3rd of November 2019 and bears the code WIT.0607.0001.001.
That's correct.
Yep. And do you have a copy of that first statement that you've made handy?
I do.
And is there anything that you would like to change in that statement?
No, Mr Rosen.
All right. There does appear to be a typographical error that may have slipped through the net. It's in paragraph 102. As I'm reading it anyway, it looks like it's an error. It's on page 17. If that could perhaps be depicted on the screen. You've got a hard copy in front of you, Ms Heckenberger?
I do.
You'll see in the second line of paragraph 102 the word complaint.
Oh,
assessed
I'm
as-
sorry, yes.
Should that be compliant?
It should.
All right.
Thank you for that.
That's all right. With that change, are the contents of your statement true and correct?
That's correct.
I'll tender the statement of Ms Heckenberger dated the 3rd of November 2019, Commissioners.
All right, the statement of Ms Heckenberger dated the 3rd of November 2019 will be Exhibit 13-26.
And more recently, Ms Heckenberger, you have made a further supplementary statement dated the 12th of November 2019.
That's correct.
And the code for that is WIT.0607.0002.001.
That's correct.
And have you had an opportunity to read through that statement before coming along to the hearing room this morning?
Not this copy in front of me, but I have read the statement that was submitted, yes.
Okay. And are you satisfied that the contents of that second statement are true and correct?
I am.
I tender the further statement of Stephanie Heckenberger dated the 12th of November 2019, Commissioners.
Yes, the statement of Ms Heckenberger dated the 12th of November 2019 is Exhibit 13-27.
Commission pleases. Ms Westholes, if I could just return to you briefly and just ask you some brief questions about your professional background and the roles that you have performed whilst working for Bupa. As you've told us, you presently perform the role of Regional Support Manager for Region 12.
Yes,
Is that right?
that's correct.
And those 6 care homes, perhaps it's 5 care homes that you've identified, are they the only homes that are your responsibility presently?
That's correct.
Okay. And is that a change that's been implemented recently in Bupa to reduce the number of homes that a person in your position is responsible for?
Yes, that's correct.
It was previously 10 or as many as 14, was it not, in
Yes,
days gone by? And probably goes without saying, but do you see that as being a beneficial change in your role?
absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be so much easier to be around and support less homes.
We'll come to this, but was at least some of the explanation for events at Bupa South Hobart that the Commission is investigating to do with the number of homes that you were responsible for at that time, including Bupa South Hobart?
I believe so.
Right. Now, you are by professional training a registered nurse,
That's correct.
and you have had some 32 years working in aged care.
Yes, that's correct.
You worked for Bupa since 2007 in a variety of roles.
Yes, that's correct.
And as you explain in your statement, in the period that I'm going to be asking you about, between 2014 and 2018, you were, with some breaks as you explain at different times, you were the Regional Support Manager for Victoria, Tasmania. for Bupa.
Yes, that's correct.
And during that period, how many homes were you responsible for in your role as regional support manager?
It did change, but generally more than 10 or more over a vast distance.
Okay. South Hobart was, of course, one of those
Yes.
homes. It's presently the only Bupa home in Tasmania. That's right, isn't it?
Yes,
Was that
yes.
also the case during that period?
Yes, that's correct.
And the role of regional support manager, as I understand the evidence that's before the Commission, was to provide clinical and operational support to general managers, that is, the managers of individual homes. Is that right?
That's part of the role, yes.
Are there other aspects of the role that are presently significant that you need to tell the Commissioners about?
Yeah, certainly part of the role is working very closely with the clinical team,
Yes.
coaching, mentoring, monitoring and supporting that group of people in the home.
And that's downwards in a sense of your responsibilities. That is, you're responsible for the homes that are within the area that you're covering. But above you in the hierarchy was a regional manager. Is that right?
That's correct.
And between August 2016 and May 2018, that was Ms. Heckenberger, who's sitting next to you. Yes.
That's correct.
All right. I'll come back and ask you a little bit more about the respective roles of the two of you. But if I could turn to you, please, Ms. Heckenberger. You don't have any medical training?
That's correct.
Yep. Your qualifications are included in your first statement. They include an MBA.
That's correct.
Is that right? And when you started with Bupa in August 2016 as a regional director, that was your first role in aged care, is that right?
It was, yes.
Do you have a present role in aged care as well?
I do.
You do, all right. You've heard the questions that I've asked of Ms Wessols. You two were initially responsible for 10 homes, is that right?
That's correct.
And they were in Victoria and Tasmania?
They were.
And at some point that increased to 14, is that right?
That's also correct.
So presumably additional homes in Victoria were added to your area of responsibility?
They were all in Victoria, mostly in the Melbourne area, but including Ballarat as well.
Right, okay. We're told, as you heard me asking Ms Wessols, we're told by the evidence of Ms Cooper, who will be giving evidence tomorrow, that a regional manager now manages no more than 7 homes. Drawing on your experience, would you also, like Ms Wessols, see that as an improvement?
Oh, a significant improvement.
And can you tell us why?
The challenge with having so many portfolios was that we tended to focus on homes that were in need. That was primarily because at any point in time there was a home that needed particular attention. That meant we were mostly reactive to what was happening in those homes. Having a lesser amount of homes would have enabled us to spend more time in homes that weren't displaying issues and challenges that needed our support.
Now, paragraph 13 of your first statement, Ms Heckenberger, you explain that the regional director role was, to use your words, the key connection between Bupa Executive and the care homes.
That's correct.
Can you expand on that for us, please? In what way were you the key connection?
Well, the organisation was very large. There were 72 homes in the portfolio. That it was a key interest in my experience of the executive that there was repeatable process and continuity across those 72 sites. In order to achieve that, information, communication and direction was channelled through the regional directors to disseminate to their homes.
I take it that information flow, which is obviously very important for the governance of the organisation, which I'll ask you about in a moment. Information flow is a two-way thing. That is, you were a conveyor of information from the facility up through to the executive?
That's correct.
Is that right? And equally, you were conveying decisions and information that were taken at the executive level back down to the facility?
Also correct.
All right. Given that you didn't have a clinical background, I make no criticism of you about that, but given that you didn't, you were presumably quite heavily reliant on those of your colleagues that did.
That's correct.
Ms Wessols was one of those.
She was a key person in that communication.
Equally, for most of the period that you were regional director, you had Mr Neil, who had clinical training as a nurse at Bupa South Hobart.
Yes, he was a registered nurse.
And Dr Monks was also medically trained.
That's correct.
She was present at Bupa South Hobart during that time.
That's correct.
Part of your responsibility, you tell us in your statement, it's in paragraph 20, I don't need you to look at it, but you explained that part of your responsibility was to oversee the general managers who themselves had operational responsibility for quality and safety.
That's correct.
And what was your relationship with the clinical service improvement team in Sydney as you understood it?
So we would interact both at a regional level but also for individual homes around a range of clinical activities, reporting processes. They would keep me closely informed as to their scheduling, what they were looking at, what they were finding. I also was able to activate that team for any clinical support to investigate anything that I or the regional support manager found or suspected or indicated in our time in the home. It was a very close working relationship with the CSI team.
Can I just clarify that a little more if I could? So the CSI team, or Clinical Service Improvement Team, was a specialist group of Bupa employees based in Sydney, is that right?
That's correct.
And was that head office at that time?
Yes, it was.
All right. And you may not be able to tell us this, but how many people were there in the Clinical Service Improvement Team during your time as Regional Director?
To my best recollection, I think there were about 5 streams of different areas that they worked in, each having multiple clinicians working within those streams.
There is some evidence before the Commission which I understand Ms Hudeck will be giving later today, that in her time as the head of the Clinical Service Improvement Team, there was a reduction in numbers of staff in that team. Do you recall that happening?
I do.
And did that impact on your ability to extract value from the CSR team?
Yes, it did.
In what way?
It impacted in a few ways. Firstly, it was a loss of knowledge. When we worked together over long periods of time in the homes, we became very familiar together about information in the home. We could assess quite quickly whether we expected things to be easy to improve or more challenging to improve. So that loss of knowledge was the first loss in that situation.
Yes.
Head count, so just availability of people and their speed at which they could be deployed to provide support. And then confusion as to who do I go to for particular supports as roles and responsibilities were changing as well.
Your direct report, that is the person that you directly reported to, was the Director of Operations, is that
That's
right?
correct.
And was that Mr Ian Burge before he left in November 2017?
It was.
Then after that you reported to the Chief Operating Officer?
I did.
And that was Carolyn Cooper? Is that
No,
right?
that was Maureen Berry.
Maureen Berry. It may just be me, but my reading of the material indicates a large number of changes, both of job descriptions and personnel in various managerial roles. Was that your experience at Bupa?
In reviewing the documents, that many of which are after my time at Bupa, I also gained that same experience that you did.
I'm not so much interested in the experience you gained from reading the documents, but rather during the time that you were regional director. Was that a feature at that time of Bupa?
Not at my time.
Okay.
Maureen Berry became acting, in my best recollection, she was acting COO. She was then appointed to COO, and I remained reporting to her until my departure.
So my word, the instability in managerial positions is something that appears to have occurred largely since your time with Bupa?
I believe so.
Ms Westholes, if I can return to you, I want to ask you about an aspect of your statement where you describe the clinical governance framework at Bupa. This is in paragraph 24 of your statement on page 6, which will be brought up on the screen in front of you and hopefully highlighted. Sorry, it's WIT.044.0001.006. If we just go to the 6th page, thank you. In paragraph 24 there, about a quarter of the way down the page, you refer to the self-audit work instruction, which was an internal Bupa work instruction, which I don't think I need to take you to unless it would help you. You say the clinical governance framework, which was in place throughout the relevant period, that is, in rough terms, 2016 to 2018 you were being asked about, was designed, as I understand it, to help the business to identify significant or high-risk areas of the business in conjunction with legislation and compliance with the Australian Aged Care accreditation standards. My understanding was and is that the purpose of the clinical governance framework was to monitor, check and evaluate care provided within the care homes. And I take it you're comfortable with that description that's included in your statement of the clinical governance framework?
Yes.
It sounds like it was a very important aspect of the overall governance structure at Bupa. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And in general terms, from your perspective, looking back on the period that we're examining, that 2016-2018 period, do you consider that the clinical governance framework operated to achieve those outcomes at Bupa South Hobart?
On preparation and reading the results of, are you referring to the mock audits, Mr Rosen?
In part I am, yes.
It was clear that at times we certainly did not reach full compliance throughout those mock audits, but as part of that framework was also the response to it and the action planning and the processes around to achieve compliance and care for those residents.
I'll come back to that in a moment. Before I do, I just want to ask you about your understanding of what the mock audits were judging. You say in that paragraph that they're judging compliance with the Australian Aged Care accreditation standards. Was that your understanding of what the mock audits were doing?
Yes.
That is the 44 expected outcomes listed under the 4 different standards.
Yes, under the old standards, yes.
Yes, which of course have now been replaced on
Yeah.
1st of July this year by the 8 new standards. Ms Heckenberger, was that also your understanding of what was being assessed in the mock audits that were conducted?
Yes, it is.
Now, Ms Heckenberger, can I focus on a particular time, which is when you commenced as the Regional Director in August of 2016. The evidence before the Commission is that in relation to Bupa South Hobart, there had been 2 mock audits conducted relatively recently before that time. One was in November 2014 and one was earlier in 2016 in February. Were those brought to your attention when you commenced working at Bupa?
The 2016 audit was, yes.
The February 2016 one, was it?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. There was, of course, one later in 2016 as well, which I'll ask you about in a moment. Are you referring to the one which had been conducted when you started?
The February audit, yes.
February audit. Perhaps if that could just be brought up on the screen, it's at tab 6 of the general tender bundle. Just whilst that's being brought up, in preparation for giving evidence here, you've had pause to go back and look at those documents again.
I have.
Yep. When you told us a moment ago that it had been brought to your attention when you started, were you provided with a copy of the audit outcomes, do you recall?
I don't directly remember, but I would expect that I was, yes.
Yeah. And you would have noted that the performance of the home in that audit indicated that there were some deficiencies, particularly in the clinical compliance area.
That's correct.
Just so the Commission can get an understanding of this, because if one looks at the bare figures, one sees that, for example, with Standard 2, which has the 17 expected outcomes to do with health and clinical care, the audit found that only 6 of them was their full compliance. Are we to take that as an unusually low level of compliance for a Bupa mock audit? Are you able to inform us from your other experience of mock audits at Bupa homes?
Homes vary greatly. In my experience, they vary greatly in
Yes.
the areas and depth of compliance or non-compliance. I think it would be a general statement for me to compare that with other homes at this time. It was certainly alarming for me as a non-clinician.
Yes.
And was of immediate attention and focus for both myself and the regional support manager.
That's your colleague, Ms Westholes. Yes. Okay. And we know that there was an improvement plan which was developed and implemented.
That's correct.
Yeah. And I'll come to the next audit in a moment. Before I do that, just taking it in chronological order, we heard evidence yesterday from Dr Elizabeth Monks, who was the GP at Bupa South Hobart at this time. Did you hear any of Dr Monks' evidence yesterday?
No,
by
I
any
did
chance?
not.
What about you, Ms Westholes?
Yes, I did.
You did? All right. One of the things that Dr Monks was asked about was an email that she sent to you, Ms Heckenberger. It's sorry, just perhaps before I go to that, if we could go to the second page of the audit document, please. Do you see the box that's next to risk calculator there, Ms Heckenberger?
Yes, I do.
Yep. Correct me if I'm wrong about this, but as I read this, this is a very easy to understand summary of the audit outcome. Is that right?
I find it easy to understand.
Yep. That makes 2 of us then. What it seeks to do is code in relation to each of the 4 standards. So we see them listed down the left-hand column, standard 1, 2, 3 and 4. And then it gives a summary of the audit outcomes using a traffic light green, amber and red.
Correct.
And where you fit in relation to those boxes is determined by the number of part compliances or non-compliances.
That's
right?
correct.
And we see that in this audit, the February 2016 one, of the 4 standards, 3 of them are rated red and 1 is amber
That's correct.
because they exceed the number of non-compliances or partly compliances respectively. And because there is more than 1 red, the overall risk is rated as red as well.
That's correct.
You were familiar with this type of description of an audit outcome at the time that you were the regional director?
I was familiar with RAG ratings and with audit results. The compliance and non-compliance was something I familiarised myself with at a clinical level on my arrival at Bupa, and I became quite comfortable with it, yes.
Okay. You told us a moment ago that when you looked at the February 2016 audit, you considered the results to be alarming. Do you recall saying that a moment ago?
I do.
Was that in part informed by the rating of red? That's the highest rating of risk that was available, wasn't it, under the mock audit process?
That's correct.
And Going back to my earlier question about providing the Commission with some contextual understanding of these, was it common at this time at Bupa at a mock audit in early 2016 for the outcome to have 3 reds against the standards and an overall rating of red?
I would not say common. There were other cases though.
Okay. Ms Westholes, are you able to assist us from your experience?
As an RSM, I often did not receive the full country's mock audit results and involved with that. But it's, I concur with Stephanie. You would see some homes with audit results such as this.
When you say some homes, I take it that's a minimum, less than half of the homes that are audited would have
I'm
this
sorry,
sort of
I can't
rating?
give an
put a
exact,
figure
but
on
it's, yeah.
Okay. And do you concur with Ms Heckenberger's description of this audit result as alarming?
It is alarming and it's concerning, yes.
All right. This type of risk calculator was introduced, as I understand the evidence, sometime after 2014. Are you able to assist Ms Westholes with that? Do you know when this risk calculator process was introduced?
I'm not. I wasn't involved with the development of the risk calculator process.
I asked I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. I asked because in the earlier audit, mock audit from 2014, it doesn't include a box like that. So is it possible then that it was introduced sometime between those 2 audits?
I would suggest that as well.
Was there any process in place within Bupa that guided you, firstly, Ms Heckenberger, if I can start with you, that guided you as to how you would respond when the overall risk rating was red? Did you get any instruction from on high as to what the appropriate response is for a rating like this?
My recollection is that the response was the same for varying levels of compliance and non-compliance. So by that I mean there was a standard process that was to be followed post a mock audit that included the creation of an action plan, which were therefore then more or less detailed depending on the findings of the mock audit. Those actions were to be sent through to the CSI team. They would review those actions, work with us to ensure that we had considered every possible rectification action, and then the action plan would be approved for activation. There was a further reporting process around the completion of the action plan that was monitored by the CSI team, and if homes were not meeting those timeframes, the regional director would be notified that the timeframe had been overstepped.
All right. Now, I neglected to ask you about this, but the mock audits themselves were actually conducted by members of the clinical CSI team, weren't they?
Yes, the CSI team had an audit team solely for the purpose of conducting audits in the homes.
Right. Now, I started to ask you about Dr Monks a moment ago, and I'll ask that tab 9 in the tender bundle for Bupa South Hobart please be displayed on the screen. We heard some evidence about this yesterday. I'm focusing on the bottom of the screen there, the email that Dr Monks sent you on the 15th of September 2016. Are you able to tell us now, and I won't ask you to guess, but had you looked at the February 2016 mock audit before you received this communication from Dr Monks?
Given the date of 15 September, I was probably not in the would have been in the organisation less than a month.
Yes.
I was still very much meeting my 10 general managers. My induction was still continuing at this time. I would say it's likely at this point in time that I have not in detail gone through the mock audit.
All right. You read the email that Dr Monks sent you?
I
take
did.
it?
I did.
Yes.
Yes.
And I take it you were concerned to see her references to the phrase extremely worrying. Do you see that in the third line of the first paragraph?
Yes, I do. And I was also alarmed by her email. My supplementary statement reflects the actions that were taken on receipt of this.
Yes. Did you note, if we can go over the page, please? There was a reference in the email that Dr. Monks sent you, if you just excuse me a moment, to some quite specific concerns about wound dressings. Do you see that at the top of the page?
I do.
Yep. And the second line, instructions from specialist health professionals, Sarah. Not being followed. There's a reference to inappropriate dressings. And then there's some discussion of falls. As you say, you detail in your supplementary statement, I don't need to go to the detail of that now, the steps that you took when you got this email. But taken together, that is the mock audit result from February 2016 and then these detailed concerns being raised by the general practitioner, we're presenting a picture of some serious clinical deficiencies at Bupa South Hobart. Do you agree?
I agree.
By this time, that is by September 2016, is the Commission to understand that the improvement plan that was put in place to address the February 2016 audit would have been completed?
Yes, I recall it was completed prior to my arrival.
If I can return to you, Ms Westholes, for a moment. You had, at around this time, become the acting manager of the Bupa South Hobart facility. Is that right?
In October of that year.
In October of 2016. So
yes.
just, in fact, it was you that requested the mock audit in October, was it not?
That's correct.
And was it the position that the previous facility manager, who we don't need to name, but I take it they left to go to some other job, did they?
They left to return to the mainland
Okay.
for family and other issues, and they left abruptly.
Were you performing both your substantive role as Ms Heckenberger's clinical support manager as well as this general manager role at South Hobart, or only the general manager role?
My major focus was as a general manager at South Hobart, but on occasion I had to leave the facility.
Now, as you've just told us, you requested that this further audit be conducted in October. Do we take it that that was because you weren't satisfied the problems that had been identified in the earlier February audit hadn't been addressed?
That's correct.
And what was it?
On reviewing the roster in particular when I arrived in the facility in October.
Can you explain that a little more to us? What was it about the roster that you examined that caused you concerns?
I reviewed immediately the registered nurse roster and I saw significant gaps in permanent placements in that roster, which caused me concern.
That is, there were nursing positions which weren't filled on an ongoing basis, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And were they being filled by casuals or not filled at all, or what was the position?
They were not being filled at all. There were not enough casuals
I see. And
on the books to do that.
all right. And did you receive any explanation from anyone at the facility about why that had happened?
Not in particular. As I said, the general manager had left rather abruptly.
Okay. In your statement, Ms Heckenberger, you say, this is at paragraph 88 on page 16, you say that the mock audit conducted in February 2016 demonstrated that Bupa South Hobart had a record of historical non-compliance, and then this one, the October 2016, highlighted continued compliance issues within the home. One of the options that was available, firstly to you, Ms Heckenberger, in this situation was for there to be a clinical governance review conducted. Is that something you're familiar with?
I am familiar with that.
Yeah. And without going to the work instruction, as I understand it, the clinical governance review was a specialised type of audit that would focus not generally on the 44 standards, but on the 44 outcomes, but on the standard 2 outcomes, the clinical and personal care outcomes. Is that right?
That's correct. It's very similar to the mock audit, just much narrower in focus, clinical and continuous improvement only.
All right. Perhaps if the table, which I handed up, which is RCD.9999.0263.0001, if that could be displayed on the screen. And just so that you understand, Ms Heckenberger and Ms Westholes, this is a document that's been prepared by the staff at the Royal Commission summarising the results of the mock audits on the right-hand side of the page. So you'll see the 4 Bupa mock audits, November 2014 through to July 2018. And if we could just concentrate for the moment on the 2 in the middle, that is the February 2016 and October 2016. And you'll see there that the reds which indicate non-compliance and the amber or mustard colour is part compliance. Do you see that? And if you just can look at the results for February 2016 in that second column and then compare those to the results in October 2016, we see considerably more red in the October 2016 column. Would you agree with that?
I would, yes.
And the reds seem to be particularly concentrated in relation to standard 2. Do you see that?
Do, yes.
For example, clinical care is red, 2.4. Medication management is red, 2.7. Nutrition and hydration is red. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And some of those, for example, nutrition and hydration, do you see that? The one in November 2014, the one in February 2016 and the one in October 2016?
I see that.
Yeah. At this time, when you got the October 2016 audits, Ms Heckenberger, were you able to make this sort of comparison looking historically at the performance of the home? Was that information that was available to you?
Not in such a succinct form as the team here have put this together. I could compare audit reports and I could do things myself to compare those, but this is a very succinct format to compare those in.
It's important to consider historical trends, is it not, in applying this sort of governance framework to see whether you've got a systemic problem or one that's just arisen recently. Do you agree with that?
Oh, definitely.
And it is concerning, is it not, that a number of areas that were partially compliant in February 2016 have become not compliant in October 2016.
It is concerning. To Liz's point previously, the clinical roster was in a unsustainable state when Liz entered the home as General Manager, and a significant piece of work was undertaken to rectify that. Only through having a clinical team being available would it be possible to provide sustained clinical care in line with our guidelines and also with the standards.
Now, in fairness to you both, as you explain in your statements and consistently with the evidence Dr Monks gave yesterday, there were a number of initiatives taken, were there not, into 2017 in that regard?
We had extensive initiatives. We were flying nurses in from New Zealand to undertake shifts. We were paying our care managers on the mainland 30% uplifts to relocate to Hobart for 3 months at a time. We were using every possible agency resource available to us. Liz worked tirelessly to fill that roster on a permanent basis. But we had to plug holes in the meantime, and agency was the only way we were able to do that.
You detail some of those steps at paragraph 89 of your statement, Ms Heckenberger. That is your ability to draw on resources within Bupa on the mainland, is that right?
That's correct.
And I take it that's one of the advantages of being part of a large organisation, that you are able to draw on those resources?
It is.
It's not an advantage that's obviously enjoyed by a lot of smaller aged care providers.
That's correct, and certainly South Hobart was impeded in that regard compared to our other homes on the mainland, not having another Bupa home nearby to draw resources from.
I understand that, and that's a point you also make, but nonetheless, you were able at this time in the first half of 2017 to draw on these resources, and it achieved results, did it not, at Bupa South Hobart?
It did in the short term.
Yeah. For example, you mention, and this is paragraph 93 of your statement, that in August 2017, so in the following year, the home met all the accreditation standards in a quality agency unannounced visit. Is that right?
That's correct.
You also make reference to an award being given to Bupa South Hobart for innovation in palliative care.
That's correct.
In 2017. We heard some evidence yesterday from Dr Monks about Bupa Model of Care 1, or BMOC 1, she referred to it as. She described that as an initiative which included her employment at Bupa South Hobart, that is embedding GPs. What other aspects of Bupa Model of Care 1 were you familiar with, Ms Heckenberg?
I believe there are about 4 parts to BMOC 1. It was the creation of a role called the clinical manager.
Yes.
It was about having regular leadership team meetings in the home, and it was an increased frequency of resident reviews of care planning.
Ms Westholt, anything you'd want to add to that from your perspective?
Yes, so one of the other initiatives around that was the administration of medications by care staff and movement of medication to residents' rooms.
Yes. It's been described in one of the witness statements before us as an initiative intended to promote person-centred clinical care in Bupa homes. Do you agree that that was the purpose?
That's correct.
And from your perspective, Ms Westholt, how did BMOC 1 work at Bupa South Hobart in your experience?
It was in its infancy around when I got there as the general manager. But we certainly were holding regular leadership meetings. There were clinical statistics being conducted, resident reviews were being conducted, and the leadership team was settling, into their roles.
Mr Rosen, might it be convenient to have that?
I was just about to say that, yes.
All right, we might. We'll have a slight break until past.
Which pleases.